Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal podcast. I'm your host, Scott Brady, and I'm joined today by Graeme and Luisa Bell. Now, Graeme and Luisa have an incredible history of travel throughout the world, where they've used their Defender 130 in various configurations to travel, the two of them plus their two kids. So they've learned a lot about what it means to travel full-time on the road. So this Principles of Overlanding is focused entirely on the lessons learned in full-time travel. So I talk about my 20 years of travel, which has never been as much full-time as theirs. Mine, I like to go in spurts. So I talk about how traveling for 2 or 3 months at a time and then coming back for 2 or 3 months, whereas Graeme and Luisa have literally been full-time living out of the vehicle for years and years on end. So there's some really important insights. There's some funny stories. And of course, it's always a joy to have Graeme and Luisa on the podcast because of their incredible experience. I want to take a moment for a special announcement of our newest video series on the Expedition Portal YouTube channel that features exploring the Smoky Mountains and the East Coast. This multi-part series is presented by Hankook Tires and is hosted by renowned explorer and photographer Sinway Xavier. This series will start at the end of September and run through all of October, featuring a Trail Scout episode, a Jeep Gladiator feature vehicle, trip planning and preparation, and some installments showing the local artisans and places to visit around the Smoky Mountains. We appreciate Hankook's ongoing support of the Overland community and this podcast. Well, Graeme and Luisa, thank you so much for being on the podcast with me today. We're recording the podcast during Memorial Day, so that is something that is acknowledged in the United States. It's when we take a moment to honor the soldiers that have fallen in battle, and it's a day that I definitely pay attention to because, you know, my grandfather, he didn't pass away in battle, but he did pass away at 95, and he had a full career in the Marines, and he fought on Iwo Jima and Guadalcanal, and he retired as a chief warrant officer in the Marines, which are individuals that are greatly respected. So we do try to make sure that we honor, you know, our armed forces and those that have lost their lives. And in the same for South Africa, you guys had some really intense wars, even in the last 100 years, where you guys have probably lost some people that were close and dear to you. So those are things that we try to pay attention to. So today I'm actually wearing, this was given to me as a gift. So it was when I was in Kenya and I was doing some projects with the embassy there, and I was given this t-shirt from the Marine One, which is the Marines that are stationed at the U.S. embassies. And so it's the Marine One insignia here on my shirt today. So, but we're going to talk about full-time overlanding and the principles of full-time overlanding. And there are few people that come to mind for me that are a better fit for this conversation than you two. So thank you so much for being on the podcast with me today.
Our pleasure. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, and you guys are currently in the process of full-time overlanding and also taking some breaks along the way, which we're going to talk about a little bit. But I thought it would be good, just as a framework, is to give the listener a little bit of background on how you guys have traveled, how long you have been traveling, and what your current vehicle is, and as full-time overlanders.
Cool. Sounds good.
Yeah. So give us kind of an overview.
Oh, who are we? So we started traveling. I think it was 2010 was our first big international trip. We went up to, from where we lived in Cape Town, we drove up to, we were heading to Kenya, and we got as far as the Kenyan border, Kilimanjaro, and then the whole family. It had been a really rough trip. I got really sick. Louisa got sick. And the kids had loved Malawi, so they were just like, let's go back to Malawi. And then...
yeah, the lake is special.
Yeah. And then we went back to Malawi, back to Cape Town, and it didn't take long for us to realize that that's what we really wanted to do with our lives, is to travel. So...
yeah, you're coming up on 15 years.
Yeah. So we packed the landy, then we were supposed to do Argentina to Alaska, landed up circumnavigating South America, then driving Argentina to Alaska. then crisscrossing the US a couple of times, rebuilt the landy, shipped to Europe, went over to Turkey. The goal was to get through to across to Russia, but we couldn't make it work with the carnets and stuff. So we drove down West Africa back to South Africa, and then after a little while we left to drive from Cape Town to Vladivostok. And the day we left, COVID smacked us.
Yeah,
and we got
locked
down, and we were stuck in a campsite. And then we tried to leave as soon as the borders opened. We tried to get up, and we got as far as Tanzania, and then the war in Ethiopia happened, and there was no way through. There was no way around it. We had COVID going at the same time. Eventually, we just kind of accepted defeat, went back to Namibia, had a braai, and then went down to South Africa. And then we spoke to a friend of ours, Chris Rattay, and he was like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "We don't know what the hell to do." And he was like, "Go to America.
Yeah.
America loves you. You love America. Go to America." So we came over to the US without the Land Rover, borrowed a couple of vehicles, found ourselves in the Arctic in the middle of winter.
I remember, yeah.
That was cool. Camped every day, all the way up, all the way down, except for one night. And that for South Africans was a learning experience. And then
you guys aren't used to that kind of weather.
I mean, come on.
You can see why humans thrived in Southern Africa, because the weather is so good.
Right, exactly.
Like,
I mean, it was minus 56 or something Celsius with wind chill on the Arctic Ocean. We went out with some snowmobiles. And I'm standing there going, this is weird.
It's unbelievable.
Crazy. But I'm not freezing. I'm not dying. I'm having a good time. So our preparation worked, and that was important to me, is to be not to be one-dimensional.
Yeah.
Not to be limited by factors like climate. So it was a big learning experience.
And I think that those are, when we push the limits a bit, whether it's a more challenging route than we would normally do, or maybe it's in a shoulder season for weather where you're dealing with muddier roads than you would expect, or starting to travel in the polar climates, you do learn a lot as a traveler. It's a very intense learning environment. It can be uncomfortable, but when you look back, oftentimes you end up with these great stories. Same with your trip West Africa. It's the one common thing that I've heard when I ask someone about traveling West Africa is, we're glad we did it. We won't do it again. And I can't think of anyone that's told me otherwise.
Wow.
So
we're going to do it again.
Yes.
Yeah.
With our children.
Yeah, sure.
Because that was hard work.
It's hard.
And it's
it's
risky.
hard work. Yeah, it's hard
It's
work.
the risk as well. That's what really, it's not just keeping everyone motivated and cool and fed and water and all that. It's more, it's dangerous.
Yeah, it can be, for sure. You have to be very, very mindful of what you're doing.
Yeah, but the people are fantastic mostly. It's the malaria.
Yeah.
It's the animals that are usually the most dangerous. But then you have the situations we had in Nigeria, which is, that's sketchy. But anyway, at the end of the day, you come out of it, but you're liberated because you know what you're capable of.
Yeah.
Same as going up and doing the Arctic, is afterwards I'm like, I'm not scared of the cold anymore. I know how to prepare the vehicle. I know how to prepare myself. I know we can survive with minor adjustments. Okay, first some major adjustments and then some minor adjustments. But it's totally liberating.
We're meant to do hard things.
Right.
We, as a species, we have always had to do hard things. And it seems like in the last 100 years, things have gotten a lot easier. I'm not suggesting that that's a bad thing either, but I think that part of what gives us that sense of freedom and liberation is understanding our own capabilities. I think when we don't test ourselves, we're most prone to that malaise. So I think we're supposed to test ourselves.
Right.
And you guys have a bunch of great books. One of the ones I have here on the table, and for those that are watching on YouTube, you can see it here. This is Travel the Planet Overland. This is the book that you guys produce that is more of the how-to. It's got more about how you did it, tips and tricks. You guys have learned some great stories about other travelers, and there are great photographs. You guys have now 15 years of day-to-day experience as travelers, and that's resulted in my opinion, some of the best overland content that we have in the whole industry is what you two produce, and your books are excellent. The books on your trips are great because they have a bit more levity, and they're fun and funny, and they're also very real, and they connect in with the reader at many levels. But your Travel the Planet Overland book, I think, is a great one for people to look at if they want to learn more about what we're talking about today, beyond just, traveling full-time overlanding. So,
Right. Yeah, we put a lot into it. I mean, there was, there's a story behind the book as well. We'd made it Argentina to Alaska. We were down in Mexico. I think we used the last of our dollars to get the visas to go do a house sit on a farm up in the hills, and to figure out how the heck are we going to go, well, what are we going to do from here? And Luisa came up with the idea of doing the book. And she was like, so many people ask us so many questions all the time. We'll just put it all in the book. We've learned so much from, we made all the mistakes in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. We all do. Yeah, we all do.
We made all the mistakes, and we learned the hard way. And I was like, if only someone had written, I mean, there's like Chris Scott, fantastic books. But to me, they're an encyclopedia.
Yeah.
This is a different concept. This is taking you through our process of learning, and then the lessons that we learned, and then the stuff that we learned along the way, the gear, and what works for us as a family traveling full time, and that's how we put it together. And it did really, really well. That was Luisa's idea. She's like, let's do this book, and it did so well that it allowed us to then convert the Land Rover into a camper. To keep going, I think all the way down through West Africa, etc. And we were smart that we printed a whole bunch of extra books at a very good cost. So
sure,
we sold those, and that also really helped to keep the balls going. And I think, other than We'll Be Free, my first book, that's the most popular of them.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, it's a great book, and it's an honor to have you guys have this conversation with us today. So one of the first things that I wanted to talk about is, when you guys were in South Africa, what were some of the steps that you took to prepare for full-time overlanding? I know that you sold your business. Let's go into some details at the high level that might help people see, like, oh, that could work for me.
Luisa, you want to get this one?
Well, we decided on a whim that we were going to do a full-time overlanding. So we shook on it, and then the next morning we were like, okay, we're doing this. And it took us 1.5 years to actually get to the point of where we could leave. We did sell our business. It was fantastic. It wasn't a lump sum of money. It was in increments, monthly increments as well. So that kept us going for a little while. We had to take the kids out of school, approach the Department of Education, and allow us to do homeschooling for the children. So that was a process. We didn't own a house, unfortunately, but in a way, fortunately. But so it was just packing all our stuff and putting it in storage.
Sure.
Which we still have to this day.
Oh, wow.
So
I say nothing.
there was a lot of personal stuff we didn't want to get rid of. And in South Africa, the resale value on personal items is not very high. So
Sure.
I figured, but I didn't realize we were going to be gone for so long.
You're going to have that rent on the storage unit for 15 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
And that's another hindsight thing,
yeah.
right?
Exactly.
But in Luisa's defense as well is that I give her a hard time about it, because at the time I was like, just keep as little as possible.
Yeah.
But the goal wasn't full-time overlanding. In the beginning, it was 18 months.
Sure.
We were going to go do Argentina to Alaska, and that was going to be it. So it made sense to invest in keeping your stuff. We had some really nice furniture.
Sure.
And all the kids' stuff. And coming back and then getting back into life, that was kind of the idea that I knew in my heart of hearts that wasn't going to happen. I really...
You hoped, yeah.
I kind of hoped,
Yeah.
that I hoped that this was going to become our lifestyle. But so, you
I think it follows a pretty normal bell curve, because you see the people who, they announce that they're going to do this big trip, and they get the vehicle and they go through that process. Some of them never leave because things change. Relationships break up, challenges happen that cause people from being able to, or even someone who waits until later in life, sometimes they wait too long, and then health issues come up, and you see that even more in the sailing side of things, where someone will have bought a boat and they've done all this work to get it ready to circumnavigate or sail to the Bahamas or whatever, and then some physical ailment comes up that prevents them from doing it. So that one of the first lessons for me is do what you can now, because you don't know that you'll be able to do it in exactly the form that you want later. And I think that that's because, in my mind, I think there's this fantasy of travel. And sometimes the fantasy itself is very rewarding. Thinking about what you're going to do, building the vehicle up for when you're going to leave, and telling others what you're going to do. There's a lot of pleasure that comes from that. I think it hits a lot of those endorphins of what you're going to do and telling people what you're going to do. But a lot of people never even make it to leaving. Some of them leave and then they realize that it's not for them and they return. I remember years ago, a young guy that was in the community, and he had done a lot of work to get ready to leave. And he made it about halfway down Mexico. And between the feelings of insecurity and the feelings of being alone and realizing that it just wasn't for him. And he had spent years, with the expedition portal threads and everything of the build and where he's going to go and this trip all the way down to Ushuaia. And I think he maybe made it 3 weeks into the trip.
I remember that. I remember he got a lot of sponsors as well.
Yeah, that's right.
He was kitted to go.
That's right. And I don't fault him. Everybody needs to do. In fact, that takes courage to admit that something's not right for you and to come back. So it's not any criticism, but it's an awareness that happens. And then most people seem to go and do some version of their trip. They almost all seem to take a little longer than they originally planned. So, I've met a lot of people in Africa that were going to do the 1 year, and most of them are around 16 months or 18 months or pushing 2 years, or we're going to just push it a little further and drive back up West Africa as opposed to shipping home. And that seems to be the case. And those are normally the younger couples where they had done some savings, or maybe they'd come into a little bit of money. And they do have a life to start back home. And there's things that they want to do. And their trip was about seeing Africa and then going back home. But then there are some that they start on their 1 year and a half journey and then never stop. And that's you guys.
That's us. We're old people now.
But Karen and Kuhn come to mind. Mm-hmm. There are many that come to mind that started off with the plan of doing this one big trip, and they have just kept going. Right. And that's certainly what this discussion is about, is how do you make that sustainable? Now, when you look back on when you left, I'm sure that there's many things that you did right, but what were some of the things that you wish you had done different before you left that you think would have really helped set you up for long-term overlanding?
I think actually going back to your early question as well, is that period of packing up, getting ready to go, and actually leaving is probably the most difficult part of the entire journey, because you're giving up everything you've worked so hard to achieve for something that's unknown. Mm-hmm. You get a slice of it doing this, that, and the other, but shipping a vehicle across oceans and then living in foreign countries and dealing with all of that, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
So it's not surprising that a lot of people back up, but with experience, excuse me, I now know that if I had to go back and do it differently, I would have not been so dedicated to the full-time lifestyle, right? Fly and drive. If I had someone who could have told me that back in the day and I'd listened, instead of selling the farm, instead of getting rid of everything, instead of not having that security, move into a smaller house, downscale, rent it out while you're gone, whatever you can do, but go spend 6 months on the road and then go 6 months back.
Yeah.
So if that kind of thinking would really change your preparation for how you leave. Like us basically deleting our former lives for lives that we had no idea that we'd be successful at. That's terrifying.
Do you think that sometimes you need to burn the ships, though?
Yeah.
You need to just, historically, there's that famous story of, I think it was Cortez, right?
Right.
Burn the ships.
Yeah. We have to make this work.
Yeah. And you guys, against many odds, you have made it work. And now, at the other end of it, 15 years in, you two are some of the most respected in the whole industry for what you've accomplished. So yeah, it's tough. You know, I look back and I think I've done pretty much what you explained just now. That's been my approach, is I travel about 6 months out of the year. Some years a little more, some years a little less. But I prefer that because I still really enjoy the challenge of business and having a team. I enjoy working with this incredible group of people. That to me gives as much pleasure, if not sometimes more, than the travel itself. I just really like working with a team of people that creates what we create. So there is a pull to leave because that's part of me, and then there's also a pull to return, and that, I think that makes a difference. But you're right. I mean, the reality is that when that was all going on for you guys, South Africa was in a challenging time. There would have been a pressure, an internal pressure to want to leave, to want to go show your children another life, a different world than what they had grown up in. Even though I see South Africa still as the Garden of Eden in my mind, there are so many more incredible things about it than negatives. But that would have been 15 years ago. Would have been a very challenging time in the country.
It was. A lot of people were leaving.
Yeah, that's right.
Permanently immigrating. A lot of people were immigrating as well. That was our business. We were immigration specialists, not
Sure.
lawyers, but we practiced immigration law. That was mainly Luisa's business.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got to see a lot of people coming and going. And South Africa is just so beautiful.
Yeah.
People are fantastic.
And it's affordable.
The
rest of the world has gone absolutely insane.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Except for if you want to buy a house in Japan or if you want to live in South Africa.
Right. And South Africa was isolated so long that it's self-reliant. And it's the bottom of Africa. What choice do you have? But then you see the elections are coming up now. And,
Yeah.
you know, they don't have power half the time. And there's a lot of issues. But I'm glad that our children got to see a different world. South Africa's not safe. You know, for many, many people, it's a daily struggle just to, you know, keep their families safe.
Yeah.
And we'd go to places in the US, they don't lock their doors.
Yeah.
You know, you go to Europe where they don't lock up the bicycles, and, you know, and it was great for the children to see that that's normal.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the world is safe.
Mm-hmm.
And we got back to South Africa after 8 years on the road. And I think we lost one pair of trousers in Argentina. For
Sure.
washing line, someone came and said, "Oh, those look nice." We got back to South Africa. We got robbed 3 times. They cleaned out the Land Rover.
I remember,
you know.
yeah.
So that was really depressing. It was really sad. But I mean, it's an absolutely fantastic country. So yeah, in terms of our future, I mean, this is the thing as well, is that I don't think we ever set off to emigrate. That wasn't really our goal, is to leave South Africa. But at the time, it definitely was part of our thinking, is that we have to make provisions for a future.
Well, and you did, and it's an interesting thing to talk about when you look at, maybe it's the difference between full-time overlanding and a life of overlanding. And for me, I guess I wanted to have a life of overlanding where I was able to do it half of the year, but then where I was able to also still entertain those other parts of me that really like the other challenges. Like you guys had your own business. Mm. It's simultaneously the most difficult and stressful thing you'll ever do, and the most rewarding thing you'll ever do, is building your own business and somehow surviving it.
I think I wouldn't have sold the business if I'd known.
Yeah.
Because it would have given me a better sense of security.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for women, one of the aspects or one of the reasons for leaving is making sure that you have that security. I'm always looking for what are we going to do in the future?
Sure.
So I love to have a sense of security. So that was one of the aspects that was the most difficult for me during travel, was like, what are we going to do next? Like, how are we going to afford to do this?
Yeah.
I mean, we've done it, but
You
know,
have.
if I had the choice, I would have kept the business,
But
yeah.
we must remember that times have changed.
Yeah.
So when we started out, I remember our first trip up to Kenya, Tanzania. We spent so much time searching for the internet.
Yeah.
Driving around little towns, trying to hack into Wi-Fi, having to stay at hotels so we can get work done because we were running the business while we were traveling.
Or
Sure.
you're trying to get the satellite phone positioned just right so
Yeah.
you can actually...
And paying $1
man.
million a second so we could tell somebody online on the phone what we told them 20 times on email.
Sure.
It was incredibly frustrating. And every time you started relaxing into the travel, boom, there's an email, you got to do this, you got to do that. So it was incredibly frustrating. And it was not as easy as, Starlink. So when we started out, I actually said to Luisa, it's the business or the travel. We can't do both.
And that was probably true at the time
Yeah.
to a degree,
Yeah.
unless you had a managing director that you would have been able to hire and trust.
Right.
And
And there
we-
was the hard part because we were the intellectual property. It was what was in us, in our brains. That was the business. We sold the database.
Yeah.
But what we knew, what Luisa knew, that was the actual essence of the business.
It's what brought people back. It's what built your reputation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what got us the biggest construction and engineering firms in South Africa. We were killing the big guys. We were like the giant slayers in our industry,
Yeah.
which was incredibly rewarding,
Yeah.
financially and personally. But I think it might have also to be a little bit introspective. It might have given us a little bit of a feeling of what's the word? Being indomitable.
Mm.
Look what we've done. Against the odds, we achieved this. This is amazing. We're actually bored with this. This is too easy now. What can we do next? What else can we achieve? It gave us the feeling that we were, we could do whatever we wanted. And it gave us great confidence to get on the road.
That's good.
Yeah.
And you've proven after all this time, despite challenges, that you can do that. You're still indomitable.
Right.
So
Indomitable goals. Yeah, I think I always remember back to a conversation we had in Ecuador. I was writing We'll Be Free. And we were renting this little place, beautiful little place on a farm. We were paying $17 a day. And all the green peppers and red peppers you could eat. And Luisa was sitting on the bed and she was like, we can't do this. I'm like, we will do this. And she goes, I don't think we can do this. I'm like, we can do this. And she goes, okay, prove it to me. I'm like, shit. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. And anyway, so I remind her of that often.
But she also knew that it was going to, likely that you needed that push,
Yeah.
that she needed to say, prove it to me that you can do it.
Right. And I
And
think
we can dig deeper in those moments when our family calls upon us to rise to another level, maybe than we've risen to before. So
yeah, but it also certainly pushes you further when
Yeah.
when you're not thinking about yourself. When you're like, well, I've got a family I'm responsible for. I've got 2 kids that are relying on me.
yeah,
This isn't fun and games. This is serious business.
yeah,
It was never a case that we could just dig into this little egg of savings, which we should have had. We gave everything to be able to. I mean, I sold my insurance policies and stuff to be able to get Carnets, because we had this faith that we'll achieve this one day, that we can make it.
sure,
So we literally financially sacrificed everything to get to the point where we are today.
yeah,
So, which kind of segues into the conversation, I think, about couples.
yeah,
You're talking earlier about some people get on the road, they're, they don't make it, they're a couple of weeks they get going, or they figure out it's not for them, whatever. Well, we've also seen a lot of relationships break down over the years. And that is, I think, a long-term or full-time overlanding especially, is the litmus test for a relationship. If, you kind of see it sometimes. You meet people, I'm like, this isn't going to work. Either they're going to have to go home or they're going to split. And a lot of the time it happens, they just split because you can't run away from the other person. You can't go hide in your little part of the house and hang out with and do your thing. It's 24/7 in each other's space, and you really get to see what the other person is made of.
yeah. Because there's no filter at times. People can be exhausted, physically exhausted. They're tired. They haven't slept well, maybe in some time. When you're in really humid environments and camping, you're just not getting quality sleep, and all of those things start to compound. And I've definitely seen couples have like drag-outs, and it's just like, whoa, that's really challenging.
Right. We learned to deal with that through humor.
Yeah. And your kids are present too, so I would think that that would have to be the strongest. And now you've done it for so long that you've now modeled good behavior. So probably even though your kids aren't present, you've already done it better for so long.
Yeah, we've perfected our argument.
Well, yeah. I mean, you got to go take a walk and go talk it out. So that way, yeah, your kids aren't seeing,
Well, sometimes
meltdowns.
it's unavoidable. I mean,
Yeah, sure.
The weirdest thing is, I'll give an example of things that really like light a fire under us is like navigation in cities.
Yeah, sure.
You never think you're like that. This is going to be something that really sparks me, man. But if you don't tell me I've got 100 meters before my turnoff and I'm in Sao Paulo and I miss my turnoff, which lands up in a 2-hour detour through a favela, that really lights me up, And in the beginning, we had to figure these things out.
Yeah.
Getting lost in Rio or Buenos Aires or whatever.
It can have real consequences, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. And so we both know there's nothing we hate more than getting lost in a city. But again, it comes back to communication.
Yeah.
And knowing how to talk to each other. And the kids are always there. And I think at some stage, everyone kind of realizes that it's not about me. You have to consider the person that's sitting next to you, in front of you, because you're all in this together. You're in this little box, and it's little farthest part of the planet. You might be in a desert or the Amazon or whatever, and it's not about you. You have to do what's right for the person behind you and next to you, and everyone kind of gets that. There's no space for what do I always say? I can't remember. But anyway, there's no space to be special. There's no space to be, demanding, sensitive, this, that, and the other. I wash the dishes. I do everything, and I make sure, and I pack them away, and I do that so that it's convenient for the next person. I cook so everyone can eat, blah, blah, blah. Each one pulls their own weight, and that makes us work together as a team, and I think that's a very big part of our success.
I do think it is. And I, when I look back on my travels with partners, I was lucky that in every situation, the person wanted to be there. Like she wanted to be there. And I think it also helped that I wasn't learning from step one. I think if you were coming into travels with a partner and you're both learning like how to do everything right, I think that would be a lot more challenging on a relationship. I think I was fortunate that I had already traveled a lot. So driving in a crazy country or navigating or dealing with border crossings or dealing with police checkpoints, like those were things I was already very comfortable with when I started traveling with partners. So I think that helped a lot. But if someone says that they like travel, that's one thing. But if they're truly I think they just have to be adventurous. And I think, Luisa, like you starting your own business, that is an adventure. So it just shows that like you have the mindset for chaos and for uncertainty and for risk. And that's really what traveling around the world is. Yeah. It's not so much like, oh, I'm so excited to see this waterfall. You do get to see the waterfall, but like that can't, but you got to get there. Yeah. You got to do all of the steps between A and waterfall to be able to experience those things. In your experience, traveling around the world, what kind of vehicles do you think best support full-time overlanding?
Full-time overlanding, I would say an older vehicle. And I know Dan Grech recently wrote an article for Overland Journal and he was arguing the point for a new vehicle, and I can see that.
I think it's either one or the other, right? It's either got to be really new or really old.
Right.
I think the middle is where you get in trouble.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, not to contradict Dan, but if you're on the road for 8 years, your new vehicle is now an old vehicle. Your new vehicle is now becoming unreliable. Now you have electrical problems, this, that, and the other. To me, I mean, this was our thing as well. You just spoke about dealing with border crossings and dealing with visas and dealing with checkpoints and all that kind of stuff. For us, it was learning to deal with the mechanical issues that we had with our vehicle. And part of it was user error, part of it was wear and tear. Altitude was a big problem for us.
You mentioned that in South America. Yeah, you mentioned that.
Yeah, they created situations we didn't know how to deal with. So we had to learn, both of us. I was raised by my mom and my sister. I knew how to change a tire. And then I met Luisa, and she's like, well, you better figure this stuff out because, you're the man of the house. And I was like, fine, okay, let's figure it out. So an older vehicle for us, our Land Rover Defender, is a TD5. So it's got one ECU. And we were paranoid about this ECU. And touch wood, we've never had an ECU problem.
Yeah.
Well,
We've had
the wires burned through.
Oh,
from the
okay, yeah,
ECU,
but
I mean,
okay,
That
well,
was-
you're
that
right.
was
It wasn't
fine.
the ECU itself. It was the
Yeah.
loom over the back of the gearbox, because let's put a loom over a gearbox. It's
Yeah.
a good place
Makes
to put
sense.
it.
I know that in that situation, people have trouble with that, and they
Yeah.
have trouble with the oil running down the loom and into the ECU.
Never
Yeah.
had that. And
Yeah.
Maybe
we-
yours is later, and they figured that out.
Yeah,
but
mine's
repositioned
2002. 15P. The 10P engine wasn't as great. It also had plastic dowels, but anyway, on the head. We learned to figure those things out and deal with them and fix them. And Louisa's our electrician. She does all the electrical work. When that loom burned through, she fixed it. When the CPS, the crank position sensor, started failing in the Congo, she fixed it. We've changed injectors in a campsite in Turkey. We've pulled the clutch in a campsite in Morocco.
Yeah.
She's a tough old girl, right?
Yeah.
She's been to hell and back, but we can fix her. We've got one little diagnostic thing called a nanocom, and we broke down in Vegas outside an In-N-Out Burger, which was great because we had unlimited refills. But it was the immobilizer. We figured it out. We went through the earths. We went through everything because we'd worked on the vehicle. We knew how to take care of it, right? So we had the little nanocom, and eventually we were just pressing buttons and going through it. And then Louisa figured out how to disable the immobilizer. And boop, boop, pressed a couple of buttons. Boom, there she goes. And then, off we go. So I think with a newer vehicle, especially these days, you won't be able to do that. You'd need to be a technician to be able to work on a vehicle like that. So if you're comparing new and old, I would definitely say for the kind of stuff that we do, an older vehicle is preferable.
Or you need to just plan that into part of your long-term overlanding, is that I'm going to need to replace the vehicle at X number of kilometers.
Right.
I think that a newer vehicle is better than any of the old ones up to a point, because they don't have the same life cycle. Like, I think that if you were to buy, a 200 series Land Cruiser, you've got 300,000 kilometers where you're not even going to look under the hood other than when it's time to do an oil change. But then after that, it's so complicated. There are so many systems. There are so many computers that once they start to break down, how do you keep up with it? And how do you trust it? And how do you even know what parts to bring along? Whereas if you've got like the Defender behind you, if you've got a 200 TDI Defender, I mean, the only time those things have ever given me trouble, it was in outside of Mendoza in Argentina. And I pulled up to this place and it wouldn't start. And I'm like, the vehicle if it turns over and it's not starting, you're either out of fuel or the fuel solenoid is not open. There's like two things that can possibly go wrong, with that vehicle. So I open up the hood. I'm like, where's the wires for the, that? And sure enough, just like the one wire that needs to open up that fuel solenoid had popped off from the corrugations. I plugged it back in and the car started right back up again. So they are very easy to maintain, that you can do most of the work yourself. Like if you look at it, it's like that is a transmission. Like it doesn't look like a computer.
Right.
But I think it's like, that's for me personally, I think learning your vehicle before you're taking the vehicle on the road is like, know exactly what's going to go wrong with that particular model or that particular vehicle, and then prepare yourself for it. Learn how to change, do mechanical services. There's so many people that we've met on the road that have never actually done anything to the vehicle. They take it to
They drive Land Cruisers?
Money.
Mercedes Sprinters.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
They take it to a mechanic and a mechanic fixes it,
Sure,
and then they
sure.
walk away and they're like, oh, this is awesome. Sure, you have the money, do that. But you're going to be stuck somewhere in the middle of nowhere, remote,
Yeah.
and you're not going to know what to do to that vehicle. So to me, you can have any vehicle, but unless you know how the ins and out of that vehicle, you know, you're not always going to have someone that's going to be there step by step.
And I notice how you use the 200 series Land Cruiser as an example. I mean, not all vehicles are as reliable as that.
No.
Not all new
Yeah.
vehicles. I mean, and I think the Land
It's a
Cruiser,
rarity, yeah.
Yeah, it's a capable vehicle, but it also has limitations. So if you look at Dan, for instance, he's got a newer Jeep, and he put a Habitat on the back.
Mm-hmm.
We did exactly the same thing with our Defender. And so I think it brings it the other aspect of it is like the best vehicle for long-term overland travel is something with a live-in arrangement. You know, something that accommodates 2, 3, 4 people, whatever you need. I mean, Dan's just had a kid
Yeah.
as well, so I'm looking forward to seeing how he adapts. But, you know, it's difficult. I mean, at what point also does a new vehicle, the cost of a new vehicle equipped for overland travel, you know, at what point does the cost of that become prohibitive? I mean, if you can afford it, sure, go for it. You know, but if you're a young family and you want to get out there and get going and you're looking at all the vehicles out there and like, man, I can't afford this. You know, vehicles are going anywhere from $100,000 to $1 million,
Yeah.
100,000 to $1 million. And it's like people are looking at that and going, well, I can't get into overlanding. Overlanding is a rich man's game. You know, I bought my Land Rover. Everybody thinks that's $1 million. Well, not $1 million, but they think it's a couple $100,000 for that thing. I bought it for $9,000.
Yeah.
It was an old farm truck that I picked up in South Africa. I've spent 30, 40,000 on it, building the Habitat and doing whatever. But, you know, at the same time, that's over years. I've spread that cost around. But it was affordable. And that's why I love to see when guys take older, affordable trucks that would, you know, otherwise be abandoned, used
Yep.
every once a week for loading stuff and pushing it around. When they take those and then they turn them into something and then they use them. Chris Cordes just got himself.
Yeah. It's a great example.
You know, an old Dodge Ram, it's like a 99 or 2001 or something.
Yeah.
Old thing with a big old Cummins diesel, I
Yeah.
believe. And he,
It's got a V10 in it. Something
Right.
simple to work on. Yeah,
right.
exactly.
And then he built a simple Habitat on the back.
Yep.
And he went down to Baja with it. He had a good time with it. And to me, that is a great vehicle. You know,
Yeah, I think full-size American pickups are often underrated for travel around the world. You know, I think of the places that I've gone, and other than some of the old cities where the roads are truly very narrow, in most cases you can drive a full-size truck because there's also services being brought in Fusos and semi-trucks and, you know, Mercedes trucks and all. So there are bigger vehicles on the road. So I think you can get away with an American full-size.
Oh, for sure. We drove that Nimble,
Yep.
based on the
Dodge Ram.
Dodge Ram.
Yep.
Not beautiful, but 5.9 Cummins diesel, wide. I parked that thing actually a Defender parked next to me in Mexico somewhere, Marilia. And I took a photo and I couldn't believe the difference in size.
Yeah.
I mean, that Nimble is big.
It's big.
But we drove it down to Belize. We went into the jungles. We did little tracks. Luckily, the owner, my friend John, he didn't mind the pinstripe.
Yeah.
But, you know, we drove through the little towns in Mexico and stuff, and it was completely doable.
Yeah. There's a lot of full-size trucks in Mexico.
Yeah. And my
There's
point,
a lot of American full-size trucks down
Yeah.
there. A lot of them are made in Mexico.
right, exactly. So that brings
Yeah.
you to your parts availability. So in Belize, you have the auto parts stores. There's a chain that's run by not the Mormons, they're, remind me,
Mennonites.
the Mennonites. They got great chicken joints and great auto shops.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Same in central Mexico too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, but you walk in, and I managed to get the front. What was it? The tie rod end. I damaged something driving in the jungle, and I'd missed the turn, whatever. And I managed to limp back to the next town where they had an auto parts store, and there they had on the shelf the parts I needed. You know. Which was great. And Cummins, you drive through any I think we had this conversation the last time, but you drive through any major center in the developing world or in the modern world, wherever you are, you're going to see that big red sea.
Mm-hmm.
And if you see that big red sea, you know you're going to be able to get parts.
Yeah.
You know,
They could fly it in if they need to, DHL it, whatever they got to
Right.
do to get you squared away.
but chances are they might even have it on the shelf. So to me, that's like the argument for the older vehicle is more like get a well-maintained older vehicle, something with a good engine, something you can afford, something you can work on and use that.
Yeah, I think that that's the most important thing is you should be spending around 20 to 25% of your total budget on the vehicle, and people flip that oftentimes. They spend 70 or 80% of their budget on the vehicle, and then they have much less for the travel, and they oftentimes get cut short, or they feel stressed because they've got these credit card bills and everything else like that because of buying what they thought they needed to go around the world, and you're much better off spending a much smaller amount. I mean, just look at what you've got for a budget. Let's say we've got a budget of $40,000. Well, you can spend 10 grand on the truck total. And so go conservative,
Right.
go like if it says Suzuki on the front, you're probably going to be able to pull off an around the world trip for 40 grand.
Right.
Yeah.
If in another country it's a Jimny, here if it's a Vitara or something like that, you're going to get a reliable little vehicle, and it's going to be able to be serviced anywhere in the world. There's Suzukis everywhere. They're not going to look out of place. They're going to get great gas mileage. They're actually quite capable off-road. But a lot of times it's this impression of, I need a Land Rover to go around the world, or I need a Land Cruiser to go around the world. And fortunately in the United States, we do have good examples like 100 Series, which is, I think, something you can buy affordably. It's going to be very robust. It's going to be able to be maintained. It's not as complex as a 200 or a 300 Series Land Cruiser. So there are options for sure, but spend much less on the vehicle than you think. But I do agree with you that the habitat is really important. I caution against trailers for around the world travel. It can add a lot of expense to shipping. It can add a lot of complexities. The number of times that I've had to back up because of a problem, and take your pick. Security issue. You turned on the wrong way on a one-way street. I mean, you guys have never done that, right?
No. Never.
I can just imagine the clatter inside the cab when that happened, right?
Right.
But I know that feeling of like you accidentally make the wrong turn, and now you're backing up. And imagine if you had a trailer attached to the back, or you go down a really narrow shelf road and there's a washout. There's been something that's blocked the trail or the road's gone, and now you're backing up a half a mile. So I just really I have not seen the argument for a trailer for long-term overland travel. I think it's a real challenge. I think it's fine for the weekend, for the week, whatever. But
You made an interesting point there about turning down the wrong road. And I think what a lot of people might not know is in the developing world, the global south, a lot of the times there's no ring road.
yeah, that's right.
Around the city.
Yeah, that's right.
You
It's a
have
one-way,
to go through the city.
and on a one-way usually.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, even Mexico,
Yeah.
you see it all the time. There's no ring road. So, in that situation, that's why I talk about getting frustrated in cities.
Yeah,
because
sure.
you always have to go through Buenos Aires to get to Ushuaia.
Yes.
You got to go through, that's a bad example. But a lot of the time you have to go through the cities.
It's very difficult to get south of Mexico City without going through Mexico City.
Right.
Even if you're on one of the outer roads,
Yeah.
Right.
you're still in Mexico City because there's 40 million people there. So it's very difficult to get away from it.
Yeah.
But-
I suppose the upside, though, of the trailer, though, is especially... so that's why when we talk about vehicles, I always advise people to get out there and travel and establish their needs, what they actually need, not
Yeah.
what they see on YouTube or whatever, what other
Yeah,
people
sure.
do. They need to figure out what they want. And we come from the perspective that we were a family and we were very budget conscious.
Yeah.
So that kind of leads our thinking always. But so with a trailer, for instance, I could see that being great for a family, you know, who loves the great outdoors, that want to go hiking, skiing, cycling, all that kind of stuff. You know, you can have the trailer with the toys on it. You can set up a base camp. You can go explore with the vehicle. You know, there's so many things you can do with the trailer. But again, you know, it has the downside. I
think in America a trailer's great.
Yeah.
You know, like I use. Like just this weekend, I was pulling the X145 around, and it's my favorite trailer that I've ever used because it can go off-road. It has tons of ground clearance, has a bathroom, has a shower, hot shower. You know, I mean, it's got all the things. Like if you're going to pull something, it sure as hell better have a bathroom and a shower in it. Otherwise, why are you pulling it? But in this particular case, I feel comfortable even taking it off-road because if I had to, I'm not that far from help. But I can imagine, I mean, like the first time I was charged by an elephant in Uganda, like try and back up a trailer when you're being charged by an elephant.
Yeah.
Like,
and there's no quick disconnect. You can't just leave the trailer and
that's
go,
right. That's right. Yeah. So, you know, I think if you're in the United States or you're doing travels down Baja, a trailer is going to be oftentimes a great choice. I just think once you start taking ferries, once you start putting vehicles in containers, once you start dealing with a whole bunch of unknown routes, unknown navigation, those kinds of things, the trailers become more of a compromise. And that's why you see so many full-time overlanders that live inside their vehicles. They live inside the vehicle that they're driving.
Yeah, and I suppose that's another plus for the older vehicles. Like my Defender, to build the habitat, I had to make 2 cuts. The one was to the roof, which I didn't cut my own roof. I sold the roof. And got a series Land Rover roof, so it didn't hurt me. And then I had to cut one of the sills, which is 2 sills, and they're each an inch.
Yeah.
Right. And that's all I needed to do to get down to the chassis, remove everything, blah, blah, blah. And now I could build my box on that thing.
Yeah.
It's a lot more challenging and a lot more, it's a lot more of a financial risk with a newer vehicle. And I mean, I could rebuild my Defender if I could get the parts. I could rebuild her in a day to what she was before.
Yeah, sure.
You know, which is pretty awesome. But I'm obviously obsessed with the Defender. But
I think there's a lot of upsides to a Defender for all the reasons that you described. But I'm seeing a lot more of those like Alucab pop tops that they're putting on vehicles. Like you can fit one to a Defender very easily. You can fit them to 70 series Land Cruisers. You see them installed on those. They just came out with one for the Grenadier, so you're seeing more and more of that.
Yeah, and they have the mod cap now as well for pickups, which I think is a great solution.
I think it's a great choice. So if you can go with a pickup truck with some payload, like a Ford Ranger is a good example, or maybe the new Quartermaster, or I think the Hilux can now be picked up with a little bit more payload. So those kinds of trucks are great to use as well, because then that habitat can be moved from truck to truck. Right. If you wear out the one, you can move on to another one. So I'm seeing more and more people using trucks for travel.
Right, and my advice to people is that you don't have to live in the vehicle. Mm-hmm. You make it comfortable for what you want to do for travel. For let's say you're on the road 3 or 4 days, and you're doing some great stuff, some epic stuff. And then you get to a destination, you book a little Airbnb, and you get in there for a couple of days.
Yeah. Do your laundry, get a nice shower. Yeah, exactly.
That's right. You don't have to have the man truck with the expedition habitat on the back.
Yeah.
If you can afford it, great.
Yeah.
Right? And we've seen people traveling a lot.
You can pay for a lot of Airbnbs with the cost of one of those vehicles.
Right.
And I think so again, everything is personal preference, because some people do want to just have their home on their wheels and they don't really want to interact with the culture as much. They want to be with themselves or their partner or their family. But for me, I want to experience the culture. I want to go have dinner in that little village. I really want to interact even with the owner of the Airbnb, and you learn all these things of like where to go, what to see, and like, oh, hey, did you know there's this waterfall right over there? And so I do like to do 2 nights approximately of camping, and then 2 nights in an Airbnb, because that gives me 1 full day to work. So each week and it cycles because that's an 8-day cycle, but it moves through the days of the week. But I end up with 2 full days a week to get work done. And for me, if I don't do that, I feel like I can't keep up.
Yeah, we used to do that. We would be like, okay, we got 2 weeks where we just go off-roading, like go do trails, like really just be out there. And then we come back and we were like, okay, book into a place for a week, because then we can catch up with work, the kids can chill, we can chill, and then obviously do everything else that needs to be done. And I think that's a great way to do it. You don't have to do a week, obviously, or we wouldn't even, it might not be an Airbnb, but just a really nice campsite.
Sure.
But you got 2 weeks where you're just like, oh, I'm doing this, it's really hardcore, it's grungy, and then you come back and you're like, oh, okay, I can chill for a bit.
Yeah,
It'll
you have to
work
take
for
it in
us.
cycles.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and I think that kind of ties into this fly and drive kind of concept as well. You know, is when we started out, our impression of how to do it, we learned so much. You know, again, it's like I come back to that book. I wish there was somebody that could have sat me down and had spoke. And there were people out there. Maybe there wasn't not to sit me down, but at least a book I could read that I could say, do it like this. And we've actually inspired some people, which is really nice to be inspirational. I mean, you know the feeling.
Yeah.
It's awesome. There'll be people say, you inspired me to do this.
Yeah.
You know, and
you guys have inspired me many times. So
that's
for
awesome.
sure.
And I was talking to, actually we stayed in the house of a Canadian chap. He's got his blue Land Rover. And we had just finished the Arctic thing. We were exhausted. You know, it was hardcore. And he was like, hey, I'm flying to Europe with my family and my Land Rover, so my house is going to be empty for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. You know, you crash. And I was like, yes, please. Yeah, we'll take that. And I walked in and Travel the Planet Overland was sitting in his coffee table. Not on his coffee table, in his coffee table.
Sure.
Yeah, just, you know. And so he had said basically what he had read my advice about flying and driving and not giving up the farm, you know, this, that, and the other. And so that's what he does. Is like he's got his kids in school. He's, you know, he and his actually no, his kids are homeschooled. He and his wife run a business. They've got rental properties, this, that, and the other. But they really, really, really wanted to travel overland. So what they did is they built up their Land Rover. They ship it over. Now they keep it in Europe. They go there for a couple of months. They go to Scandinavia, whatever. You can see there's just big smiles on their faces the whole time. They stay in nice little places. So they're having a great time. And they fly back home and do what they have to do. You know, and it's a great example of like, that really taking the pressure out of the situation, which is fun. I mean, it's great. I mean, we'll see how it goes when they get in a little bit deeper into it and start going places like deep into the Silk Route or, you know, Africa and, you know, where it's a lot more challenging. We'll see how it works out for them, but it's a great way for them to start.
Yeah. Well, you never know until you're tested.
Right.
Like people have constantly surprised me.
Right.
You know, the one guy who's all tacticaled out with all of his, you know, gear in his 8,000-pound truck, you know, those guys are usually the first ones to give up.
And then you meet the little old lady
Of course.
in a Toyota freaking Camry or something.
There was a Toyota, an 80-year-old woman in a Toyota Tercel who drove across Africa.
Which shows you can do it with any vehicle.
Absolutely.
You don't need to be kitted out to the T.
You don't.
You don't need to spend money on, oh man, the amount of money I've seen thrown around on some products that are kind of, I mean, they're great, but they're kind of useless. You're never going to use it. You'll use it once, and then that's it. And
or you'll feel obligated to use it once.
exactly,
I mean,
because you paid all that money for it.
You really don't. I mean, you know, we'll get into some of the accessories here in a minute, but I think it would be good to talk finances for a moment because I think it helps people give some perspective. So, on average, how much do you guys spend a month full-time overlanding?
I think it depends on the country. So West Africa was very expensive for us because of the visas. It was almost $100 per person. Even though we have South African passports, it helped nothing in that instance. And then Europe, you're not paying for visas, so you're good. But it's expensive for the cost of living. So I think on average, we would spend about $1,500 to $2,000 a month. And that would be inclusive of most of, you know, the shipping costs and all of that incorporated. But we haven't really shipped recently as such. But yeah, that's about ours. But we don't go out a lot.
That was before COVID though, right?
Yeah, that was before COVID. Yeah, you're right. I mean, the US is expensive. Mexico's not as cheap as it used to be.
Sure.
But I think like for the four of us, probably about $2,000 a month.
And
But
are you close to that now that you're traveling more, just the two of you? Or are you finding that, because like this trip right now, you're traveling just the two of you?
us.
Yeah.
Well, I think the difference is, we've been living in Mexico. There's not a lot of stuff there. So we came to the US and we're like,
Yeah.
let's buy a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, is that
Well,
what you
that's
mean
me.
by there's not a lot of stuff in Mexico?
No, like there's, anyway, I am of a certain size and I can't get clothing there.
Sure.
So obviously I'm going to spend more money to, take back. But
Yeah, sure.
so we're probably spending more than that, but we are also free camping, where there's a difference. So yeah, we can free camp on a lot of the places. Where in Mexico, you can free camp, but you just got to be a little bit more careful about.
It's more
where.
difficult to find it. Yeah.
Exactly, and it's mainland Mexico, so you don't want to be really going off too much off the main routes. And then obviously, the food's good, so some of the food, and then we got to, we braai a lot more. Yeah, so
Sure.
it's really it's difficult to gauge, but
that's a pretty good indicator,
yeah,
I would say. And I if I need to exclude like flights, because I do more fly and then drive, but I would say I'm probably a little bit more than that, probably in that $3,000 a month range is what I typically come in with myself and a partner usually, or a travel companion.
But you eat out as well. You see, we try and avoid restaurants and that kind of thing.
I think that's the big difference, is that I will camp a little less than you guys, so probably only camping half of the time. And then I do avoid eating out often. I'll eat out once a day. So like I'll have one meal out a day. And I also feel healthier that way when I do that. And one of the things that I've done that makes me feel healthier and also reduces cost is that in any big city, you can find a little health food store and you can buy some protein shakes.
Okay.
So in the morning, I have a protein shake. And if I can't find milk or some milk substitute, then I just make it with water. And that seems to me, that and a coffee is like superpower energy for Scotty in the beginning of the day. And then usually I try to find some place to eat, 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And that helps to control the expenses.
Yeah, for us, we fast until 12.
Yeah.
So we generally don't. I mean, in Mexico, we'll eat at a restaurant. That's not an issue. But in the US, we tend to find, obviously, the cost is quite high. So in, Latin America, it's a lot cheaper. You
Much
can pick
more
up chicken and
much more,
or whatever.
much more affordable. But I found Africa to be very affordable overall.
Oh,
Kenya was surprisingly expensive, but it's definitely come into its own in a lot of ways. And then, of course, if you're going to national parks in Tanzania or Kenya, I mean, I had a $1,200 day in Ngorongoro. I mean, it's just a single day.
Not even including an overnight.
No, that's without accommodation.
Yeah.
And without food. That was literally just park fees and vehicle fees.
Did it?
Yes,
and you
for
won't
sure.
do it again. Right?
Yeah, for
there
sure.
You go. You have to pay.
There's times you just got to pay.
I'm going to do Kilimanjaro. I'm just going to pay it. I'm doing this, or going to an island or something.
Yes.
It's like you're never going to do it again. You might as well do it while you're there, because you're not going to have that opportunity again. So there's definitely that kind of.
I agree.
Little bit of spending money you got to put aside for those kind of.
And maybe
instances.
that's why it's so important to, on the day-to-day, be more mindful about what you spend money on, and then that way, when you're like, you know what, I am going to take 5 days on Zanzibar, you're not really too upset about the expense. But there's definitely been times when I've spent more, like in the polar regions, it's very expensive. Fuel's very expensive. Any supplies are very expensive. It's shocking what it takes to do something like Antarctica. It's very, very expensive, but you don't need to do those things to see the world. But the budget can range a lot. But I find that Africa was affordable, and you can stay in, especially South Africa, for the quality of service and food and hospitality. And I mean, it's pretty shocking. You can stay in the Four Seasons in Johannesburg for $270 a night. You are lucky to find a Holiday Inn in Southern California for that kind of money.
I think our currency, South Africa's currency is pretty bad.
Yeah.
So,
It's
I
very
mean, that
weak,
definitely, it helps towards it. But
Yeah, if you're buying in dollars, for sure.
yeah, for sure. And I mean, South Africa, Southern Africa is such an amazing area to explore. And
Yeah.
South Africa is like the Western Cape. You can be at a beach in one day, and then you can be in the mountains within a few hours. I
Yep.
love the diverse landscape that it has. And it really is beautiful. If I was going to advise anyone to travel anywhere, I'd say take a trip to South Africa, rent a vehicle, like a Brits rental car, drive
Totally.
up to Namibia, up the west coast.
Oh
and
my
just,
gosh.
just explore
Life-changing.
that. Exactly. And
Go
then
to
after
Botswana.
that- exactly. And then you're like,
Life-changing.
you've already covered such a big portion of that kind of, man, it's gorgeous.
That is practical advice that we're giving all the time. We sit around with recently at Overland X where we were chatting to a couple, and they wanted to get on the road, they wanted to explore, but they were nervous about this and that, and they had a big vehicle, very well kitted out, they built themselves. And I was like, listen, fly to Cape Town, rent a kitted 4x4, or even fly to Windhoek
Yeah.
in Namibia.
Yeah. Which is a fantastic city.
Right.
Yeah.
And you
Very
can rent
safe.
a fully kitted 4x4. Take 2 weeks. It's going to cost you, $150 a day.
At least, yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, 150 to $300 a day, something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
But you're not shipping the vehicle.
Yep.
You're getting to break the seal, and you can go as rough or as gentle as you want. You can go to all the tourist spots, or you can go out into the desert, and you can really get a feel of what it's like. And then while you're sitting there and you're having a barbecue or whatever, and you're sitting underneath all the stars, and it's just you're in this perfect environment, completely alone, then you go, do you know what? I like the roof tent, but this might have been better. Or, ground tenting is not that bad if we did this. And you can really get an idea of what your style of travel is, and I think that's a great way for people to really get going in this whole overlanding thing, and not to sell the farm and do all that kind of stuff, is get some practical experience with limited risk.
Yeah, and I think, Dan Grech is a good example of that. He has a lot of professional skills in technology, and so he'll work really hard, save a bunch of money, buys a new vehicle, kits it out, and then travels for a couple of years. Another one that comes to mind is a friend of mine, Stefano Melgrati. Italian. He's an architect, so professionally trained architect, which is always in demand. And it's not a skill that expires easily. Like maybe some of the technology changes a little bit about the work, where you do the work. But he'll save up money, and he travels on $22 a day.
Wow.
But he rides a motorcycle. He rides a 250cc Yamaha that gets 70 plus miles of the gallon, and he camps every single night.
He eats noodles and
He eats once a day.
fruits and vegetables.
He eats once a day,
Yeah.
but he spends on average $22 a day. So it's really possible. The other one that comes to mind is a story that you guys shared with me, which was the Japanese man that you met on your travels down through Africa. Now, where did you met him at a border, right? What border was it?
We first actually met him at I don't even know if you can call it a hostel. It was just a weird, like, campsite kind of thing, and then and he was there.
Where?
And he
Which country was it? Morocco?
Man, I think it was like Ivory Coast or somewhere.
Wasn't it? No,
No,
wasn't
it was further
No, it wasn't
up.
Morocco.
Anyway, it was. I can't even remember what country.
Maybe
it was.
Western Sahara or something, yeah.
Yeah.
It was just a casual meeting.
Yeah.
It
And
might have been Senegal, but it was literally like, hello.
And he couldn't speak a lick of English. It was like no English whatsoever. I don't know how he communicated, but it was really bad. Well, he would use Google Translate, I think, at the time. And
And I do remember at the beginning of the trip when we met him, he was wearing white. Like
it was white. He was still
But
wearing
all white. I don't know what you'd call it, some kind of uniform. I think they have a name for it in Japan, but it was basically a white top, all linen,
Yeah.
white linen.
Maybe that was why I thought he was a monk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we
Then we met
came
him,
across him again in Gabon or something, and he was hitchhiking, but before the border. And I'm like, sorry, man, there's no way I'm carrying another guy over the border.
Yeah.
Because you just don't know,
don't know.
right?
Yeah.
If he's got a bag full of
Of course, whatever. Yeah.
yeah, there's no way I'm going to go down with the dude. I'm like, I'll give you a lift after the border,
Yeah.
but I'm not going to give you a lift to the border. And so he was hitchhiking. Again, he was like this mysterious kung fu dude that
Yeah.
like David
Carradine,
or something, traveling the world, solving problems. But we knew nothing about him. He was the most mysterious person I've ever met, but he was also incredibly friendly, and he had a great aura about him. He had this really cool attitude. And then we ended up picking him up somewhere in Gabon or something. And
it was Guinea-Bissau.
But now his tunic, let's call it a tunic, it had now gone from white to a kind of a yellow.
Sure.
And the red soil of Africa.
Sure.
And then we saw him again in the Congo. We picked him up in the Congo, and by now his tunic had turned more of like a reddish, pinkish kind of color. And we had this breakdown. He just lay in the back for days on the worst roads. And he'd just lie in the back. I don't know if he was sleeping or meditating, but he ate all my bananas. I remember that. He just went through bananas like crazy, this guy. And he was just sitting there quietly. And we were having a major breakdown. Not a major breakdown. We were having big problems with a misfire with the Land Rover going through the Congo. The locals were drunk on palm wine. They were smacking the vehicle. And anyway, we found a place to pull over just as the sun set, and we got all our tools out, and we look, and there's Yuki. He's got his little blue tent, and he's gone.
Gone. No lights in his tent, nothing. It's like he literally went into the tent and just
disappeared.
Like
opened a portal and went through.
It was the weirdest thing.
But
we were like, you want dinner? You just boom, gone.
Do you have any idea what he would spend a day? It had to be
probably
nothing. Yeah,
because
he was hitchhiking and he was spending time with others or taking a ride with other travelers.
Yeah, he wasn't even taking buses and taxis. No. He was literally hitchhiking.
And he would eat very little as well. What we saw, I mean, just a bit of bread,
kind of an ascetic, a little bit, maybe just. He just wasn't consuming much of anything.
I think,
but experiencing a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think at the end of the trip, he'd probably be like some cyclists I know that they had more money when they left than when they started.
Yeah.
Because people feed you, they pick you up, they'll put you in their houses. They see you suffering and they want to alleviate that a little bit. And generally, the Africans are incredibly generous.
They are.
I mean, all around the world, we've met amazing, wonderful, generous people.
But isn't that an important lesson? So if you look at Yuki or you look at Stefano Melgrati or a Russian hitchhiker that I picked up between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, it's just they were living on very, very little each day. So it's not that travel isn't possible. Mm-hmm. It's that we make the choice to travel in a certain way.
Right.
Exactly.
So to answer the question, travel is absolutely feasible. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, you got to wonder, are they learning more about themselves? Are they having a richer experience because of that? It's possible. I think the more isolated, so you think about the traveler in the $1 million unicat. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't go outside. He's got perfectly climate controlled, and all the money in the world. You got to wonder how much travel actually changes that person.
I think
maybe not as much.
I think we met early on when we were driving Patagonia, and there was a cyclist. Man, this guy was. You could see he had a hard time. The wind pumps down there. He was sunburned. Do you remember the guy? And we were like, okay, we're going to stop and give this guy, just find out if he's okay, because he looked really bad. And we stopped and we started talking to him, and he was just in his own world. It was he had no headphones on or anything. He was just so focused on, he was cycling at the time. Mm. And we said, do you want a cup of tea? And he had a cup of tea, and he just literally, you could just see him becoming alive again. But he was just, the amount of focus, and we would just, I could never... And at that point, I could never understand why he would do it, put himself through something like that, just the physical challenge itself.
Sorry, that's him there.
Oh, wow.
That's after we fed him tea and
now he's smiling.
Yeah,
it's he became more animated. It was just, but I can now see why people do it, because like you say, you have a completely different experience if you're traveling, if you're walking, or if you're cycling, or if you're just sitting in a big air-conditioned truck. I mean, I would love to walk. But I don't know if I've got the.
You let the ego strip away a little bit. I think about a lot of the things the way that I've traveled at times. It was something that made my ego feel good. And it didn't need to be that way. I was fortunate that I was able to do it. But looking back, it's really important to remind myself and others is that you don't need to do it that way.
Yeah.
You don't really need to have that fancy stuff. You don't need it. You really don't. But it doesn't mean that it's wrong to have it, but just maybe spend a little bit of time with yourself and think about why.
Yeah.
Why do I feel compelled to spend €1 million on an expedition vehicle?
All right.
Or
So-
why am I overlanding? I think that is we had a discussion the other day and we were like, we started overlanding for a specific reason. You know, my father had passed very suddenly. We realized life is just not worth, you know, the money, just accumulating money and things. It didn't make sense for us. We were like, anything could happen. Like tomorrow we could die, and then what did we actually do with our lives? How much time did we spend with our kids? So it was for me, it was more of that kind of moment that pushed me towards just giving it all up. But to me, overlanding should be done for a reason, not for the gram.
Yeah.
And to me, it's changing. I wish you should sit yourself down and say, why am I actually doing this? Am I doing it for the fame and fortune? Because it's not for a lot of people, and it doesn't come for a lot of people as well. It should be for a purpose.
Yeah.
Like anything you do in life, right? It should be for a purpose. It should be meaningful.
Yeah,
So-
then it's more rewarding
Exactly.
when you're able to give back too on our travels. And maybe that's a good pivot. When we are traveling full time, we do have the opportunity to give back. So I think that it's a good idea to, when you're traveling and you're looking ahead to where you're going to go, find a place where you can volunteer, even if it's just going to an orphanage and holding babies for a day, or maybe it's going to a school and sharing your journey and showing these kids another culture and another way of life.
Yeah.
Maybe some fun photos. But there's ways to give back. There's all over the world there's need, and we all have our own skills that we can use to give back. We choose not to talk about our philanthropic work because I want it to be just about that, not specifically what we do, but I think it's a good idea. It adds more purpose to the travel.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you really want to go on an expedition, you got to think of a trip with a greater purpose, because otherwise it's not an expedition. You've got to do something of a higher order, a higher purpose. You've got to be supporting scientific work. You've got to be doing research. You got to be doing real philanthropic work in order for something to be coined an expedition. So, and think about that. Think about what you can give back along our trip, because I feel like I've gotten so much out of travel. It's completely changed me as a person. In the last 15 years, I'm so different than I was 15 years ago. And I like myself a little bit better because I learned a bunch of stuff, and I screwed up a lot, and I made mistakes, and I had to come to terms with a bunch of things in my own life that I wanted to have different. But I think that if we give back, if we travel with purpose, then I think it gives us those greater rewards, maybe what we were looking for to begin with.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Sure.
I think for us, the journey was a very important part of becoming who we are. You know, Luisa and I both had tough childhoods. We didn't have much growing up. We had stuff we needed to work through. And the journey was, I think, life-saving for me in a lot of ways, because I became the person that I could respect, a person that I could be proud of. You know, it wasn't all, you know, fake confidence and stuff like that. Now I've earned real confidence.
Yeah, it's
And
not
wisdom.
bravado.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. That it's not, and which makes you weird. I think it not weird, but I think makes you stand out a little bit and be a little bit different from other people, because people that generally can't relate to that kind of personality, especially if it's a personality change. The people that you used to know go like, well, I don't know who the hell you are anymore.
Sure.
I'm like, well, that's a good thing. 'Cause, you know. And then giving back as well. I think it's something that we're getting ready. Like, it's always something we've tried to do in little ways and in big ways. But it's part of that is being part of the community like that you're in, and being good to people and kind to people. Feeding a dog. giving them water, helping someone out if they need a hand, just being a good person, and leaving a good impression when you leave somewhere, and I think is very good as well. But then, of course, there's philanthropic work, which is something that I've always, now that I've got myself sorted out, I think I could start helping other people. And I think I needed to be at that point.
It's also one of the best ways to help ourselves is to help others.
Right. When you're not thinking about yourself the whole time. When you focus on
I think
others.
we're supposed to do that.
Right.
I mean, we're meant to be in a village. I mean, that's where, if you think of human history, most of human history is a small village.
Right.
So I think we're supposed to help, do a barn raising or something like that. It's really about giving back and helping others in that way. I also wanted to take a brief moment to thank all of you for listening to the Overland Journal podcast. By listening to this podcast and subscribing to the Overland Journal magazine, you're supporting our employee-owned and veteran-owned business. Impartial reviews and in-depth content like this would not be possible without your support. If you enjoy the podcast, I think you'd really love the print magazine as well. And 100% of that subscription price goes back into creating the content like you're listening to right now. And as a special thank you for your loyalty, we're giving 20% off any subscription. And that even includes our special lifetime subscription, which includes numerous lifetime-only benefits. You can go to overlandjournal.com and use the code OverlandPodcast at checkout. Again, that's code OverlandPodcast at checkout, and that'll give you 20% off. I sincerely appreciate your support. That journey that we've all been on is because of the fact that when we're traveling, we're allowing ourselves those moments to consider our own mistakes, our own learnings, the things about ourselves that we need to change. We get a lot of time while we're driving to think. Sometimes we get time to listen to a book or a podcast, something that can help us be a little bit more mindful of what needs to change in our life. And it's those hard things like crossing West Africa or difficult routes that also change us. And they help us to be a little bit more mindful of, we can do this, and I am capable, and I can be proud of myself, for example.
And you also learn a lot about humanity. When you're in the middle of Nigeria and you're going through the toughest day of your life on the road, and you meet someone who's kind, friendly, and helpful, and and you realize that most of the time when we're on the road, we're at the mercy of the people that's around us in the countries that we're driving through. And you could be in the most remote areas of the world, and you could drive into a little village. You're at the mercy of these people, and our experiences, and it's weird too, but I think goodness lives during the day.
That's probably true.
And evil comes out at night. But our experience has nearly always been fantastic. And it's also like...
don't drive at night. That's a good place to start for long-term overlanding. If you want to make it to the other end of long-term overlanding, start by not driving at night, unless you absolutely have to.
And we've contradicted that advice.
So have I. But it's like you're spinning a revolver.
Yeah.
You're literally playing Russian roulette. Yeah. So how many times do you want to spin the revolver?
Right. Yeah. And it doesn't matter. You could be in Europe.
Yeah.
The creeps come out at night.
Yep.
The visibility's bad at night.
Yep.
Things happen.
Yeah. Animals on the road, drunks on the road, all there's just stuff.
Yeah.
It might not even be the boogeyman. It's just literally there's just things you can't see.
Right. And the other thing I like is pointing out the Land Rover on the cover of the book is the front windows are open. That's because we had AC, but we never used it. And that's how we drove, always with the windows open. So we weren't behind this tinted glass. People couldn't see us. They could just see this expensive vehicle, the stickers and this, that, and the other. We were, in some ways, it's kind of like driving a Land Rover Defender around the world is like driving a motorbike.
In a lot of ways, yeah.
Yeah.
Because the environment is coming in, whether you like it or not.
Whether you like it or not. If it's raining, you're getting wet. And I think, that's a big part of it as well for us, is, we were always visible.
Yeah.
to the people there. When you're driving through a village, your windows are open.
Yeah.
You're not hiding away. They can see your face. They can see your smile.
Yeah.
You know, you wave. They wave back. You know.
Yeah, it's really important to not tint the windows on a vehicle.
Right.
For a lot of reasons.
These are tinted.
No, in the back for kids, but in the front, try to keep them lightly tinted or not tinted at all. So that, again, or roll them down like you've done.
Yeah, like we always
where
do.
people can see you for sure. I love our meandering conversation. We're going to pull back a little bit to the practical ways of earning a living on the road, because I think that's what a lot of people would consider. I think one of the ways I've seen that's most successful actually is people that have property that they rent while they're traveling. It's come up a surprising amount in the people that I've interacted with that are doing long-term overlanding. They have a home or a couple homes. Sometimes it's the couples that have come together later in life and they both had a home and they rent those while they're traveling. In my own case, it's something that has really helped me because I have properties that I rent while all the time, and that generates an income. Whether Overland International is in business or not, I'm able to do the traveling because of that. So I think that having rental properties is a good idea for full-time overlanding or not. I mean, just having a diverse portfolio that allows you to earn an income long term. So properties can be a great way to do that. A lot of times people already own a home and they're getting ready to travel long term, and it's tempting to want to sell it, but I think it's also very easy to spend all that money very quickly on maybe a fancier vehicle, for example. And that is going to be a depreciating asset. Whereas if someone starts off with, okay, I'm going to take this house, it's just on the outskirts of London, and you're going to be able to rent it for £2,500 a month, and next thing you know, you have a travel budget that you're able to maintain long term and continues to adjust with inflation. So any inflationary pressure that's happening, like we're experiencing in the world today, the rent is also going to go up, and that income will adjust based upon those inflationary pressures. So I think rental properties is a good idea. For another one, you see people doing this, but it's a cautionary tale. You see people successful with YouTube as travelers, but it's very, very difficult to get started with that. Most of the people who are successful are the ones that have been doing it for quite some time. They did it when there was less competition and they built a loyal following, or either their adventures have a very unique storytelling component to it, or they themselves are very unique as people, and that's very attractive to others to watch, or there's some drama at play. There's something usually unique about their story that compels hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people to watch. And I've seen people that they make a couple $1,000s a month doing that, and that's very feasible to do. The only concern that I have two concerns about it. First of all, it's very difficult to do. It's very, very difficult to get to that point of making that kind of money today. If you were to start today and say, I'm going to be a YouTube influencer, that's a very, very difficult thing to do. And the second thing is you don't own the platform. So if YouTube now becomes not as popular as TikTok or whatever comes next, and you spend all this energy to build this income, and now the world is a fickle place. And people change their, preferences around apps and social media and everything else quite often. Like you think about someone who spent a whole bunch of time and all they were on is Facebook. That's not going to be as good as if you had a great Instagram following, or now maybe a great YouTube following, or maybe a great TikTok following. So I think it's really important to recognize that you don't own the platform. So if the platform changes, your income could suffer. So I think it's possible. I think people have done very well with it. People have done very well as influencers. But I think it's more difficult than it ever has been to be an influencer, and also because consumers are more aware and companies are more aware. And so I think that the money is more difficult to come by.
It kind of comes back to what Luisa was saying earlier, is what's your motivation to travel? Do you overland to travel, or do you overland for fame and fortune,
Yeah,
etc.? So,
which is fine if that's what you're doing. Just own it.
yeah, I suppose. But these people tend to be quite entrepreneurial as well, so they can be a little bit much. The thing about the YouTube is we tried it, but we were never willing to be completely immersive. And I think that a lot of the YouTubers and the influencers and stuff, it's immersive. Like, they have to be posting all the time.
Yeah.
They have to always be in a beautiful location or a great location or have a great vehicle, all this, and they got to be doing their stories every day, 5 stories a day on Instagram. They got to have the videos coming out regularly on, a schedule.
time.
They have to be great videos. They have to be in awesome locations with a good story. It's a mini production company.
It is.
And I have a lot of respect for the people that can get it right.
Yeah.
It's incredibly difficult and expensive.
It is.
The equipment, the travel, the time, this, that, and the other that goes into it. If you can get it right, good for you. But it takes a hell of a lot of investment. It takes a consistency.
Yeah.
And it's getting easier in these days with Starlink and things like that, where people can now post from almost anywhere in the world, and they can have high-speed internet and that. For us, we dabbled in it for years. We really tried to get it going, and we got to the point of having 10,000 subscribers, and we were just exhausted with it. And we just said, you know what? It actually caused a lot of tension between Luisa and I, because that was her part of the business. But to get out a video, you have to film it, right? Which that means you have to have all your equipment in place, charge, memory cards, this, that, the other. Now you're trying to raise kids, you're in the middle of the Congo or whatever, right? So there's all the prep that has to go before you start filming. Then when you're traveling along and you're having a really tough situation, everything's going wrong, blah, blah, blah. Wait, stop. Are you filming? Are you filming me getting stuck in this mud, having this breakdown, dealing with this person? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then now you've got all the footage. Now you're going to make sure you don't overwrite your memory cards, blah, blah, blah. You've got to sit down, have the time to work through all of this footage. And then when you've got this final product and somebody keeps tripping over your computer cable and the internet keeps dropping.
Sure.
And I'm painting a picture for you.
No, it's true, but it's true.
And then you got to upload it now, because you got every Thursday you got to upload it. Now your internet is a trickle, and you're literally sitting there, Luisa, until 3 a.m, just watching that thing uploading. Wakes up in a bad mood, blah blah blah. For us, eventually, I got to the point where, we've done everything right. We've really, really tried it. We haven't gone to some extremes that some people do to get viewership. And I got to the point where I just said, I'm not doing it anymore.
Yeah, you got to be willing to sell a little bit of yourself, I think,
Right.
in order to get the views. And that sometimes that means you've got to be very contentious, which means you got to always have controversy around your videos, or there's got to be something else that you're selling to get people to watch at that kind of volume. It's very, very difficult. And there are some that do it great. They do a great job, and it's impressive to watch. I just think that if you're going to do a full-time job from the road, maybe you're better off doing marketing and social media for other companies full-time while you're traveling, and then you don't have to show the whole world your life and everything else. So I think I think it's possible to do well with YouTube, but I think that window has closed to a certain degree. It's a lot more difficult now to accomplish that at the level that it takes to get that kind of income.
There's 2 creators that I know personally that have done well. And the one is Eva Zubek.
Yeah.
She's done incredibly well.
Yeah. She's an incredible human being,
Yeah.
and she's also a professional.
That's
She
right.
was on television. She was a professional host
Right.
of a television show. So she knew how to make great content.
Exactly. So she's her own production company.
That's
She's
right.
the focus of it. Her life is her story.
Yeah, we've had her on the podcast. She was a real professional.
Yeah. And she's done an amazing job. The other was Grizzly and Bear. It's Lee and Steph. You should have them on sometime. And they're a good example of how to do it. He's a smart guy. He's non-resident in Australia. She's French. He works on oil rigs. And he's not just mopping up the oil. He's one of the team leaders.
Sure.
So he'll go and do a few months on the offshore, come back loaded. Steph does the videos. They don't have kids.
Yeah.
They got a lovely little Land Rover that they've kitted out, and it works very well for them because they're having fun.
Yeah.
They're
not counting on it.
And you can see they're having
Yeah,
fun.
sure.
They're rock climbers. They're beautiful people. They're having a great time.
Yeah.
And that makes it really fun to watch.
But he's earning his money by another means.
He's not
They're not
depending
relying
on
on
it.
the YouTube to make them the money on the road.
Yeah,
Just-
and you do see people.
difficult.
You do see people that have professional skills that can be employed remotely, and they're doing well.
Yeah.
Like Chris Cortez comes to mind. Like he can be traveling and still working. There's lots of professional services that you can do from the road, and be able to work and live on especially with Starlink now. And I mean, in some ways, that's what I do. I run a business, but I'm able to do it for the most part while I'm traveling, which is good. We do have YouTube because we believe it's just a category of media that we want to continue to cover, but it doesn't make a business, so it's very difficult for it to make a business. So
Yeah.
And then I think there's an example of like what you guys do, which is content creation. So you create content like your books, and you create articles for Expedition Portal and Overland Journal. You guys have become trusted contributors and team members of Overland International, and so you guys make every 2 weeks you get a check from Overland International because what you guys create is exactly what we need. So I think that it's possible for people to create content for other media companies and to earn a living that way.
Yeah, so many times I get messages from people asking me about writing a book, publishing a book, etc. And it's I try and give them as much information as I can, but at the end of the day, first I'm like, have a good story to tell it well, right? And be prepared to do a lot of marketing, right? Because if you're skilled enough and published enough, fortunate enough to be able to get like one of the big publishing houses to be interested in it, the vast majority of travel books these days are self-published. And We Will Be Free, our first book, has got 450 4.5 star reviews on Amazon, which is, I think, one of the highest out of the self-published travel books, and that kind of sets me up for everything else that I do.
Yeah, sure.
But what people don't see is it was years of self-promotion.
Yeah.
That behind the scenes are going in to promote the book and doing that. I mean, our first trip into the US, I think we spent our last couple $100 to buy a box of books, We'll Be Free. And got to the Overland Expo expecting like, this is going to be our big shot, right? We're going to get the media and they're all going to be like, wow, look at these amazing people, and my books are going to sell out. And next thing, I'm going to be doing radio and TV interviews, and it's just going to shoot from there. That was the hope.
Yeah, sure.
Right? And then we got there and it just snowed all weekend.
Yeah, it was Snowverland Expo. Yeah.
Snowverland Expo. And then we landed up selling our books at gas stations.
Sure.
Because people would come and look at the Land Rover and like talk to us for a while and then go, you should sell it. You should wite a book. I'm like, crazy that you mentioned that. I've actually got, and they're only $20. And Americans are so generous that eventually it became a kind of a business strategy that we would stop to put in gas and kind of just wait for it. And it worked. We managed to drive across most of the US selling books out of the back of the Land Rover.
Oh, that's so great.
And,
and there's another story to tell.
Right. And exactly. And what's hilarious, we thought, okay, well, man, people have been so generous. We'll drive up to Alaska and we'll just sell the books as we go. And if you're selling 3 books or whatever, you're paying $5 a book to print. You sell them for 20. That's a 15 profit. You sell 4 books and then your expenses are covered.
Yeah.
Mostly for a day. Well, we didn't realize that Canadians are different to Americans. So we crossed into Canada, and the only people buying books were Americans.
Oh, sure.
In Canada.
And the Canadians would come over and talk to us, and and I'm like, oh, by the way, the book. And then they'd look at you like, oh, I know, you're just trying to sell books. That's your whole angle here, isn't it? And we're like, well, yeah, but no. So it didn't really.
Yeah, maybe that's the kind of the entrepreneurial spirit of Americans. I think that they.
Yeah.
That's
and
so
the
fun.
generosity. But my point is that it's unless you're a gifted writer, and you've got an amazing story, and you really know how to do the marketing, and unless you're going to do all those things and be all those things, I think it's very difficult in terms of writing to make a living these days, and it's getting more difficult.
Well, I don't know. I think there's different media outlets, and I think every media outlet is looking for a different kind of story writer.
Yeah.
So you can, there's thrillers. They just want the kind of list kind of thing, adventures. What can you do in Texas in one day kind of thing. And I think it depends on. I can't say that making a living on just writing is or relying on that to travel is viable. I think you should always have different avenues of making money, just in case something goes wrong. But yeah, I think there's a lot of media outlets. I think it's just a lot more difficult now because there's a lot of people that want to work remotely.
Yeah.
So having a writing gig and then doing something else digitally or remotely, definitely you can do it. But
diversify a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Keep your options open, because one avenue closes, at least you still have another stream of income until you figure out the other one.
Yeah, the one thing that's interesting for us as a business is that from the very beginning when we started the magazine and the website is that we wanted the people that contribute, for the most part, to be experienced.
Yeah.
So you guys have the advantage, and it's why we've always enjoyed working with you, of that I know I can trust that your advice is going to come from this well of failures like my own, but we have to have those mistakes. We have to have had those hard days, and we've had to have had those mistakes, I think, in order to come at this kind of content with the right perspective. So much of the editorial that we come across in Overlanding now is like basically selling things that people don't need.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with reviewing lots of equipment, but when it comes to the advice that we do, like on this podcast today, we haven't told anybody that they have to buy anything. In fact, we're recommending that they buy something less expensive, because we've learned, again, the hard way that that those expensive things isn't what made travel feasible for us. So for those that are looking to create content in the overland space, it's really important to first focus on gaining the experience and traveling with less, so that way you have gained more skills yourself. Mm-hmm. I love that famous saying from the Maasai warriors of like a man travels with his experience on his back. So the more experience that we have, the lighter the backpack. And it seems to be the case with vehicles. So for those that are wanting to produce content, like for outlets like Overland Journal, the most important thing for us is experience. So it's the reason why we have you guys contribute. It's the reason why we have Dan Greck, who has so much experience contributing. You happen to be great writers as well, and objective and all those other things. But at the end of the day, as the publisher, I have confidence that you're going to be sharing with our readers things that come from a well of experience. Mm-hmm. And that's where that confidence comes from. So for those that want to do that kind of content, start by gaining the experience and being really open to learning, coming in with a student's mindset, so that way you can learn as quickly as possible, instead of thinking that you know it all, because it comes across. It really does come across that way. So that pretty much covers the ways that I've seen people successful earning living on the road, having rental properties, content creation, some success with YouTube and social media as influencers, and then the professional services route, which seems to be emerging with Starlink and becoming more and more feasible to do. And the last thing around the finances I think is important to talk about is retirement. when I have spoken with full-time overlanders, it tends to be one of their greatest stresses is that what do we do when we can no longer travel and produce content like this? Do you guys have any advice that you would give on people preparing for the end of the journey, for maybe the dessert menu at the end of life where maybe travel isn't feasible because of physical limitations or other things? How do you guys plan around that?
Well, there's a couple of things. The one thing is the long-term overlanders that we know, and we know a lot of them, tend to be people who have simple tastes. So when most people, I think, when they're thinking of their retirement, they're thinking of the nice big house,
golfing,
golf, a couple of vehicles, maybe a speedboat, holidays every few months. You know, people want to have a very high standard of living when they retire. Whereas we've basically spent a large portion of our adult lives living in a box on wheels, traveling. And I don't know about, I can't speak for Luisa, but I have no aspirations to have a speedboat, you know, a couple of flashy cars, a big house, you know, for me, if anything, I want to have a little off-grid log cabin, you know, on a piece of land where my kids are close. And so I think that's a very important part of it is knowing what you want out of your retirement. You know, if you want to go to live that expensive life, well, then you got to stop doing this long-term overland malarkey, and unless you have the professional like Grizzly and Bears Lee, you know, who's saving by traveling, right, making a bit of money out of YouTube. Maybe he's even got a rental property that he hasn't told me about. And that rental property, when he finally decides it's time, he can either move into it, or he can sell it. And then he can go get a little sailboat, or he can get the little cabin, or he can do whatever. But I can guarantee you that Lee's not going to be living in a triple-story house in the middle of Sydney, you know, with the newest Land Cruiser outside. After traveling like that for so many years, that's not going to be the lifestyle that he's after.
I think they're incongruent. I think that once you've traveled that long, to your point, you don't want those things anymore because you realize that they are the last thing that will make you happy.
Right. You want freedom. You want maneuverability.
Yeah. So you end up in the tiny home. We see that, right? We see that progression. You know, they start off van life, they go to sailing, and then when they're done with sailing, then they build the off-grid cabin in Canada.
Right.
Like we've seen that by so many people that have gone through that route. Is that throughout the whole process that the tastes remain fairly simple because you do realize that, and you're so industrious and so resourceful by the time you're done full-time overlanding around the world for a decade or more, that you probably are pretty well set up to be like, I'm just going to enjoy my cabin, go fishing every day.
But that's the mindset as well, as that I think a lot of people look at long-term overlanders and they think, oh, great, you've been on holiday for the last 15 years. That's been the hardest work we've ever done. You know, life was easy before we became long-term overlanders. And I'm lucky to be married to someone like Luisa who does not take days off. She's the hardest working person you ever meet. She's always busy doing something. And
it's an Afrikaner for you.
Yeah, and
they work hard.
They work hard.
They are hard working people.
Yeah, and she allows me a break every now and then. But I mean, I'm the same thing. I have to be productive. So the point is, what is retirement? So am I going to stop working? Am I going to stop being productive? Am I ever going to get to the point where I say, okay, I'm 65 years old, I'm done. I'm going to start watching rugby and cricket every day.
Yeah.
And
I don't see you doing that.
That's all I'm going to do. It's not going to happen.
I don't see you doing that.
No, so
I see you dragging a log across the tundra and then just falling over someday. It's like that's what I hope for myself. That's what I hope for myself. Is that
you're a Neanderthal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's my aspiration, is to like devolve to like full Neanderthal status at some point.
That's why I inspire you.
Yeah, so I think that's really important perspective, is that by the time you're done with long-term overlanding, you will be such a different person and you'll have such different standards for yourself you'll be fit and healthy and likely still productive member of society, even at an advanced age. There are some really interesting statistics out there about the longevity of an adventurous person. They actually outlive the general population, because people will say, like, this person's so adventurous, they're going to end up dying. But that isn't usually what happens, because you've built so many skills along the way. You've stayed active and healthy. You've typically eaten more healthy. You spent a lot of time in nature. You've gained a bunch of perspective. You're fairly happy. You have close relationships and connections. And so you think about, what are the things that kill the average person? Car accidents, heart attacks and things, stress.
Yeah.
And by being an adventurous person and being active and being a good driver and being a defensive driver and a capable driver, you keep removing a lot of the things that actually kill people on a regular basis. It doesn't mean that it's not going to happen, but the likelihood starts to drop that you're going to die by those more traditional causes. So adventurers actually outlive the general population, despite mountaineers are the exception. Mountaineers don't do as well in that longevity side of things. But
yeah, for me, it's when I think about retirement, is I think I'd like to live in a place where it's easy to retire. Firstly, because you got to think about your social system, or this, am I going to be able to go to the hospital or afford to go to the hospital?
Yeah, sure.
So, and I think because we're South African born, I still have a South African passport, so does Graeme, but we're more like citizens of the world kind of thing. And because we've traveled so extensively, we can say, okay, well, maybe we will retire, we won't, in say Germany, because we know the social system is good there, and we'll be taken care of if something had to happen to the other one person,
Yeah, sure.
So that's my.
Well, I've got a British passport as well. I don't know how you forgot that.
Well, I know, but I'm not going to tell you.
Of course, I'm an international man of mystery.
You are, absolutely.
I'm going to have a German passport hopefully soon as well.
Yeah.
But my point is I've been paying taxes in the UK without living there. So I've got to qualify for social services, right? When it comes time for retirement, when I finally get to that age where I'm like, okay, now I'm ready to go live in an apartment somewhere.
Yeah.
But I mean, you have to make arrangements. We pay we've got the insurance policies. I'm probably going to die before Luisa, and she'll get paid out $1 million, and she can go and meet up an Italian lover boy and go do whatever. I mean, and I look forward to her having that new life. But but yeah, it's a very important consideration. And
Sure.
I think the advice that you were giving earlier, especially about the rental properties and stuff like that, if you can set yourself up before you travel in the way that you can be more successful at the end of your travels, that's really a wise investment in the future. Instead of, again, spending the money on the vehicle, spend it on the asset. Find a way that you can earn that income, or you can earn the skills. I mean, looking back now, if I had gone and learned to be an underwater welder on a rig, the amount of stress that would have been taken out of our lives by me jumping on a plane, flying to Angola, going and spending a month making a ton of money, coming back, everyone, hey, let's chill, let's have some fun. I've taken the risk, but I got the reward. If I had to look back at it, buying a small property, investing that money. So when we got the urge to travel, it was an urgent urge. It's like, let's go now.
It sounds like it.
And it still took us 1.5 years to wrap up.
Yeah.
But in hindsight, knowing what I know now, I would have taken a couple of years and really just downsized, invested, been smart, and found a way to make it a lot less stressful for myself on the road. With an eye on the future, so we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, well, we all do, and the biggest challenge is that none of it comes quickly. A healthy lifestyle doesn't come quickly. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes discipline. The financial benefits of life, there is no such thing as a get-rich scheme. Some people have gotten rich in ways that are very instantaneous, but it represents a very small percentage of society. So the traditional ways of investing and being frugal, and maybe don't buy the $200,000 overland vehicle, buy the $20,000 overland vehicle, and invest $180,000 in a property. And then you can flip the script a little bit, which I think is important. We could make this a 3-part series for sure. What for long-term overlanding, what are some things that you guys feel have been key to it being sustainable? Like you recently got a dog. Like what are some of the things like that have really made it feel like home on the road?
Well, I think we have very few like spoils or luxuries. So for us,
except for Chewy, he's actually running under the table right now.
yeah, he's over here sleeping.
He's camped out.
So for us, when we started traveling, there were a few things that I would give up, and that's obviously our bra, because we're South African. I have my down duvet, feather down duvet. And
which are like really nice.
Yeah.
Those are really nice.
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't going to sleep in a sleeping bag because I was living on the road.
Yeah.
So I wasn't camping every night. It's actually living. So there were a few things. And then obviously the kids each had a little crate of their toys. So I think, for me it was just, I could still spoil myself. So I didn't feel like I was completely just giving it all up.
Yeah.
Because that just... Yeah, for women, I think you still have that little nesting thing going. So you still gotta feel like you're belonging to something, or you still own something. That's from home kind of thing. And then the dog is, well, I actually got Chewy for my daughter.
Lies.
Keelan was supposed to go work in Canada before COVID hit, and then COVID came, and that plan went to, and I said, okay, Jessica's going to be lonely. Let's get a Chewy. Chewy loves me more.
That is not true. She's lying to your face. I got to double down on this. That dog was for her. Jessica's the excuse. That's what she used. She would bug me because we'd just done West Africa and we'd taken care of a friend's place and they had a bull terrier. And she hates bull terrier, Luisa. She hated them, and she fell so deeply in love with this dog. So it was filling a hole that she had. It was something, and then she'd start on me. Every time I lit the fire and opened a beer, she's like, "We need to get a dog. We need, and just a little dog. You won't even know it's there." This, that, and the other.
He is tiny.
He is tiny, but he's got
and then
a
he
good
goes,
personality.
"It's for Jessica. Jessica's lonely," and she's still towing that line today. But don't believe a word of it.
Well, because Jessica's in Mexico right now
with her own dog.
And where's Chewy at? Chewy's here in Arizona with Luisa. So
Exactly.
I think you might have a point there, Graeme. I think you might have a point.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, those things, they do make a big difference. Like for me, I think the strongest pull is that I want to be traveling with someone that I care about. Like the times that I haven't traveled with someone that I care about, I didn't enjoy it.
Right.
So there's been times that I've traveled like for work, or there's been times where I was trying to accomplish some unreasonable goal. But when I look at the travels that I've had the most fun with, it's with longtime friends, or it's with a partner, and it just, for me, it makes a huge difference. Like I need that in my life. It's part of who I am. So that's one of the things that I recognize for me that supports longer term travel. And then I really do, if I can read a book at the end of the day, or listen to a podcast during the day, or a book, an audio book, those things are really like, it's like a solve for me for whatever is going on. Like I like to be able to read. I like to be able to learn a little bit every day. And if I can do that, it's so funny because Paula will be editing the video, and there'll be some like crazy like Tim Ferriss podcast going on in the background, so she'll hear like whatever it is that I'm trying to learn about that day, but it usually has nothing to do with overlanding. It's just something that's interesting to me. I'm curious about it. So if I find that I can travel with someone that I care about and have a way to read or to learn during the day, that it makes it very sustainable for me. I don't need much beyond that. And I think it's probably because I do more of that fly and drive process, where even during Expedition 7, which was 4 years total, I was constantly shipping the vehicle to the next place, flying home for a period of time and then going back again, for months at a time. But I do find that the process of going back and forth is pretty sustainable for me, makes it sustainable.
I like to look for beauty. And you can find that in many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
It could be in the landscape. It could be, nature, the vehicle, the place. It doesn't matter. There's things that give you the fizz.
Yeah, sure.
I like to use that James May-ism. But something that I like, it's weird. I don't know. It gives you a feeling of satisfaction.
Yeah, sure.
Something that makes you feel good.
Yeah.
And those are special moments that you can find, and you can find a lot of them while you're traveling. They're like these little pearls, just hidden in existence. And I really get a lot of energy off of that. It could be just, go to town for a taco or something, and you have a good meal and you have a good interaction with someone and you feel good and you walk away from that.
It is interesting how food can definitely, it is. It's just a part of life.
Yeah. And then just being good to yourself and being taking care of yourself, eating well, going for a good long walk and getting that little endorphin rush, somewhere where you haven't been before, and you're seeing something. Like we took a walk across the road here to the lake.
Yep.
I was like, I've been here a million times and I've never seen that. That's beautiful.
It is a beautiful lake.
And that gave me a bit of a fizz, and it improved my day, and I came back feeling good about myself. And I like to look for those things in the day because they make it worthwhile.
And it does seem like that the two of you have started to make health more and more of a priority. Part of what was the impetus to this podcast was when I saw you a couple weeks ago when you first came to the shop before Overland Expo, and you hopped out of the truck. I mean, you look great. Like you have spent, and that is hard to do.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Every pound of fat on our body has 3,500 calories in it. The amount of effort it takes to get because that's more than what you need even in a full day. So if you didn't eat at all, if you had 60 pounds on your body, it'd take you 80 days to lose it. If you ate nothing at all.
Right.
So that's very, very hard work to get to that point where it looks like you've lost 40 or 50 pounds, I would say.
Pretty much, yeah.
That is very, very difficult. At what point did you decide that, like, I'm going to make health more of a priority to make this sustainable?
When we finished doing the Arctic trip and we handed back the Nimble in one piece and in good condition, that was extremely stressful for me, taking somebody else's vehicle to very remote places.
That responsibility, yeah.
Yeah, but it was also the culmination of how many years on the road, the kids, raising the kids, now having to get them educated. It was hard work. It was very, very, very hard work. And I would go walking twice a day and do this, that, and the other. But at the same time, I'm turning 50 this year. And I was looking in the mirror and I'm going, well, now it's time to turn the page, right? During all those years on the road, we would drink a lot of beer and we'd barbecue all the time and eat nice things, because that was our luxury, was food.
Yeah, sure.
Right? And so it's not good for the
waistline.
The waistline. But
or the ability to continue to do this long term.
Right. And then we got to Mexico and all of a sudden I was just flooded with anxiety. It was weird. We'd finally moved into this little house. The kids were all together. Finally, I didn't have to worry about what's going to happen every single day. I was in a routine, and then all of a sudden this anxiety came out of nowhere and it just started beating me up every day. And I realized it's because I've always been promising myself. When we started traveling, I was like, well, I'm going to get, you asked about retirement. I'm like, well, I'm going to get to that age now when we've done all this and we've achieved this. And then I'm going to have to step up and perform, because now's the time to make it all come together.
Yeah.
And that was like, okay, man, now's the time. Now you got to dig deep and you got to shine. And I realized that sugar was adding to my anxiety. Alcohol and sugar. If I had a couple of beers,
both of them are a form of poison for sure.
Right. And if I had bars of chocolates or whatever, and then I was eating a lot of chocolate, and I'd wake up the next day and I'd have anxiety. I was like, why do I have this anxiety? And then I started going for walks and stuff, and then I'd feel better after the walks, and then I'd have a bit of exercise, and I'm like, wait, I started with these little stretchy bands and stuff like that. And then I started off small, and I realized, okay, this is it. I'm going to change me physically, and that's going to help me change me mentally ahead of turning 50.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I need to get myself in shape. And that's what I did. And I realized that a lot of people lose weight and they don't keep it off.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because they're changing patterns but not lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And they're like, okay, I'm going to sacrifice, blah, 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 blah. And then it's a waste of time if you're just going to put all the weight back on again. It's a waste of sacrifice.
Yeah, and they say that 96% of diets fail.
Right.
So if you get almost 100% failure rate, it has to be something different. It can't just be like, I'm going to go on this diet to lose weight. It's going to be, I'm going to change my life for the rest of my life starting today. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So that's what I decided is what I realized that the sacrifice, the fasting, the cutting out the sugar, the exercise, all that was making me feel a lot better. And I was finding those little pearls of beauty I was talking about earlier. I was finding them easier to find because the anxiety was being crushed. And the more I got into it, the better I felt. And eventually I got to the point where I've still got a bit of work to do, but I'm feeling good, you know, and I just feel better physically and mentally. I'm more productive, and that's what I want to do because now we're gearing ourselves up for the next stage.
Yeah.
And what's that next stage? Well, that's going to be like the Silk Route.
Yeah.
Or, you know, so the whole thing is, this overland thing is so deep in us that I'm going to do anything I can to make sure I can keep doing it.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a
And do it
big
in
part
a
of
sustainable way. And I think being healthy is sustainable. When I'm traveling, I get my healthiest because I actually get into a better routine. Whereas when I'm home and I'm in the office, I make bad choices. Like, you know, and like you talked about, you know, like during the day is when the good things happen and during night was when the bad thing happened. Like I make terrible choices at night. You know, that's usually when you have a cocktail. It's usually when you have dessert. It's usually when you overeat for dinner, or it's 8 p.m. and you're snacking and you should have stopped eating 3 hours ago. So I do work a lot more now on the decisions that I make after it gets dark. And I'm trying to eat a little bit earlier in the evening so that way I'm just shutting it down. But right now I'm working so much that I'm using food as like that one little treat that like rewards me for 7 days a week or whatever, which it's not an excuse. It's just an awareness that I have of like, oh, I'm overworking, and because I'm overworking and I'm overtired and probably not well hydrated, I'm just making poorer and poorer food choices. You know,
one of the things we struggled with on the traveling is to get into some kind of routine where you can have a healthy diet, where you can exercise an hour and a half a day or an hour a day, where you can, you know, exercise regularly and do that. I mean, because being on the road can be stressful. You have a breakdown, you have a shit border crossing, you get to the camp. You know, the last thing you're going to think is, you know what, I'm just going to skip it. You know, you're going to crack open a beer, you're going to put the fire on, you're going to get some meat out and, you know, whatever it is. You're not going to think about...
Or you're going to dive into the Oreos or whatever.
Yeah. So, you know, I think being off the road has enabled me to get into to the point where I can get some kind of routine that I can then try and keep going. So it was interesting now driving up from Mexico. Now I've got my yoga mat, which she steals every night to sleep on. I've got my little stretchy things, and
that's awesome.
And so now your workshop here is a great place to work out or whatever. You know, Overland Expo, you're walking all day, so you're not. But anyway, now I'm starting to find because that's my challenge is how to take that healthy routine and make it part of the travel routine.
Yeah, sure.
And
this is a good test for that.
Yeah, I'll be writing about that soon.
Please do. I'd love to. I think that would make for a great article on Expedition Portal, is that journey that you've been on. And for those that are listening, for those that are professionals in the health and wellness and fitness space, I mean, if you've got other ideas that you'd like to share, we'll include that. We're planning on doing a future episode around health and fitness while traveling. So I'd love to get some feedback from those that are regular listeners, and you can reach me at scott.a.brady on Instagram with that feedback, because we'd really like to learn more about it. I need the help. I go through cycles like most do where I always make functional fitness a priority, but I don't always make healthy eating and healthy sleep and stuff as much of a priority as I should. So, Well, this has been an incredible conversation. We're at 2 hours, and we could easily go for another hour. And that's because there's a lot of layers to full-time overlanding. There's a lot of things to consider around making a life on the road. And you two are an incredible resource. And you've got your book, Travel the Planet Overland. I'd recommend people take a look at that. You also have, let's talk through how people follow what you're doing. Obviously, they can find your content on Expedition Portal, but how do they follow your travels on Instagram? How do they check out your older videos on YouTube? Where do they find you?
If you search A2A Expedition, that's number 2A Expedition, you'll find our website and
YouTube,
Facebook, and YouTube. And then on Instagram, I'm Graeme.r.bell. Graeme.r.bell on Instagram.
And that seems to be your most popular Instagram.
Yeah, Luisa
channel.
was in charge of the A2A Expedition Instagram thing, and I was just running my own, and then she was so busy with the YouTube videos and stuff, and then mine.
It's hard to keep up. Yeah, it's hard to keep up with it.
So if anyone does go to the A2A Expedition Instagram, it'll just redirect them to mine.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then where are you guys headed next? What's the next location where people can bump into you?
We were supposed to be heading back to Baja, but we got so many great friends in the US, and it's great to see them all and stuff. And we were convinced to go up to the Northwest Overland Rally, which to me is...
It's a great one, yeah. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's unmissable. If you're going to go to any of the overland shows, or rallies at least, that's the one to go to. And then we'll be heading down to Overland Expo, PNW.
PNW.
We might do a presentation, but we'll see about that.
Hope people can bump into you there.
Yeah. And then I might take her up to Canada.
Oh, my Lord.
And then
and on that bombshell,
I say it now so I don't get in trouble.
He convinced me to go to Northwest Overland Rally. We'll just keep driving north. I was like, Canada's just across the road. And
Jasper's just there, and everybody else is in Banff. We'll go up to Jasper. And then down back to Mexico, and then we'll be back next year, I think, before we ship to Europe.
To do the Silk Road.
Yeah,
fantastic. Well, I appreciate you both so much. You have inspired me countless times in your own journeys. You're such an important part of the team. You guys do such incredible work, and your books are great. Please check out their books on Amazon and other sources so you can follow their journeys and listen to their stories. And we thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.